Welcome back to everyone listening to Freight Insight Weekly, brought to you by Freight Collab. Today is Monday, November 18th, and we're back with another deep dive. This week we're looking at some pretty big stories from last week in global freight news and what's happening over in Dubai. And before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the Freight Collab YouTube channel and leave your comments and thoughts in the video comments.
Sounds good. Yeah, we've got a pretty interesting mix this week of both good news and bad news out there. Everything from rising costs that are impacting shipping lines to kind of the boom that we're seeing over in air cargo as we get closer to the holiday season. All in all, it's a very dynamic time to be involved in the freight industry.
For sure, a very dynamic time. I think a good place to start might be with Hapag-Lloyd. They moved a pretty massive amount of cargo during the first 9 months of this year, almost enough containers to fill 4,650 Olympic-sized swimming pools, which is a 5% increase in volume. So that seems like global demand for goods is still pretty strong. What do you think?
Yeah, those are some big numbers. And I think it does show that even with some of the economic headwinds that are out there, things are still moving along. Consumer spending is strong, especially for things like tech, apparel, and home goods. So it's good for the global economy for sure.
Okay, so that is good for the global economy.
Yeah.
But what does that mean for people running their businesses? Does this mean they should be upping production to meet this demand?
Well, there is a bit of a twist to the Hapag-Lloyd story, because even with this surge in volume, their net profit actually dropped by 47%.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a pretty big drop, and it just goes to show you that rising operating costs, whether it's fuel or port fees, it really eats into those margins. And then we have to think back to the disruptions earlier this year in the Suez Canal. A lot of companies had to reroute their ships, which added both time and expense to their operations.
I see what you mean. So it seems like even with the high demand, just navigating global shipping can be a real challenge.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean for our listeners? Should they be worried about delays and rising costs?
I definitely think it's something that they should be aware of. If their business is relying on goods being imported, they should start thinking about how they can lessen those risks. Maybe they should look into having different suppliers or maybe different shipping routes, or even think about sourcing things closer to home.
That's all great advice. Sounds like in this kind of environment, being adaptable is going to be key. And speaking of adapting, let's switch gears and talk about the air cargo sector. Things are really heating up over there, almost literally as we head into the holiday shopping season.
Yeah, it is pretty interesting to see how things are moving over there. You've got Black Friday and Christmas right around the corner, and every retailer is going to try to get their goods out on time. Air freight is going to be how a lot of this stuff gets moved, especially with some of the other issues and delays that are happening with other shipping methods.
Yeah, and that increased demand is really being reflected in the price tag. From Asia to the U.S., shipping by air has gone up 49% compared to last year. Is this just a simple case of supply and demand?
Well, for sure, that's a big part of it. High demand and not enough space on airplanes is going to drive the price up. We are seeing airlines add flights, though, especially coming out of China. But they can only adapt so quickly.
Okay, so with this air cargo crunch, what should businesses do, especially some of the smaller businesses out there that might not have as much leverage as some of the bigger players?
I would say that the most important thing to do is plan ahead. If you know that you need to ship things in the next few weeks, make the arrangements right now. You can think about consolidating shipments, which will help maximize the space and also help with getting better rates from carriers. And you also have to be ready to maybe adjust your timelines, as there are definitely going to be some delays.
That sounds like really good advice. It seems like being flexible and planning things out is super important right now. But let's not get too gloomy. There are some companies out there that are not only doing okay, but thriving. Like CMA CGM, they reported a pretty amazing $2.73 billion in net earnings for Q3. That is more than 7 times what they made last year. How do they manage that?
That's a huge accomplishment. It shows that they are doing strategic planning and executing it well. Strong global demand and the 5.5% rise in shipping volume that we talked about definitely helped. But CMA CGM has also been expanding its services and investing in ways to improve their operations, especially using digital solutions. They've really adapted to the changes happening in global trade.
So it seems like they aren't just riding the wave, but making the wave. What can other businesses learn from them, especially those that are feeling a bit overwhelmed by all these challenges?
I think the big takeaway is that being proactive is key. CMA CGM didn't just wait around for things to get better. They were actively searching for opportunities to be more efficient and expand their reach. They put money into technology, streamlined their processes, and built strong relationships with their customers.
It's a really powerful message for any business, no matter how big or small. Being proactive, embracing innovation, and always looking for ways to improve. But even with successful companies like CMA CGM, there are always challenges ahead. The U.S. is thinking about putting in place some new tariffs, which would have a big impact on global trade. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, the recent U.S. election definitely makes things uncertain when it comes to global trade. And if they put these tariffs in place, it's going to lead to higher costs for businesses and consumers, and could lead to disruptions in supply chains, which would force companies to rethink where they are sourcing things from.
It sounds like those what-if scenarios we've talked about in the past could actually become reality. And this isn't just a worry for companies like CMA CGM, but could impact any size business,
All
right?
right, absolutely. Tariffs have a wide impact, and all businesses need to be ready. Now is the time to start looking at your supply chain and think about where you might be vulnerable, and start looking at other options for sourcing things.
Yeah, it's all about being prepared and having those backup plans in place, just like we talked about with the Suez Canal issues. And speaking of being prepared, it's really interesting that while all this is happening with tariffs and the economy, Dubai is actually making a big push to become a center for logistics innovation.
Yeah, that's true. It seems like they are really trying to build a really strong freight ecosystem. The National Association of Freight and Logistics, or NAFL, has been pretty active in trying to make that happen. Back in March, they hosted the FIATA Region Africa Middle East Field Meeting and Conference. And they were talking a lot about ways to build more resilience in the sector, as well as making multimodal transport better and encouraging more dialogue between people. Yeah, that event really showed that Dubai wants to work with everyone and find solutions for the problems that are happening now and the ones that could happen in the future. And they weren't just talking about ideas, they really pushed the need for using more digital tools to build a more environmentally friendly supply chain, which is something that we see happening all over the world.
So this digitalization thing, how does that actually help someone who is running a small business who's listening to this right now?
Well, let's say you are a small business owner and you need to import materials to make your products. If you use these digital tools, you can see exactly where your shipments are at all times. You can track them and see if there might be any delays. You can even find the best routes to save money on fuel and cut down on cost.
That's a great way to explain it. Now everyone can understand what digitalization can actually do. And NFL has been busy since that conference in March. Last week, they had their 39th annual general meeting, and they talked about their goals for 2025 and also talked about some events that are coming up that will focus on helping people in the industry grow professionally and work together better.
It sounds like they really want to help people learn and grow in the industry. And they aren't just focused on the big companies, they're putting in the work to build a workforce that has the skills to deal with all the changes coming in the future.
It really looks like Dubai wants to be seen as a global leader in logistics. And speaking of big global gatherings, we can't forget about the Global Freight Summit 2024. It's actually happening right now in Dubai, at Expo City, Dubai. They have over 5,000 freight professionals from 155 different countries there. It's like the Olympics of logistics.
It's a pretty amazing event that brings together a lot of really smart people in the industry. And this year's theme is acting on the opportunities of a changing world, which is very appropriate considering all the changes we have been talking about. They are tackling some of the biggest issues facing the industry, like digitalization and sustainability, as well as how to build trade routes that are more resilient.
It definitely sounds like an event that anyone who is serious about being successful in freight should attend. But for those of us who aren't at the summit, what are some of the key takeaways that we should know about?
I think one of the most important things to take away from this is that the global freight industry is all connected. What happens in one part of the world impacts everyone else. The Suez Canal, the rise in air cargo, these new tariffs, these are all connected and show how important it is to be able to adapt to change.
So it's not just about knowing what's happening in your area. You have to think globally and understand how things happening far away could impact you.
You got it. And that is why events like the Global Freight Summit and organizations like NAFL are so important. They create a space where people can share knowledge, work together, and come up with new solutions that can help the entire industry.
It's all about building a stronger freight ecosystem that can handle whatever comes its way. But let's zoom out a bit and think about our listeners out there. A lot of them might be running small to medium-sized businesses. How do all these global trends impact them, and what should they be focusing on?
It's a good question, and I think the important thing is not to let all this overwhelm you. Just focus on what you can control. So take a look at your supply chain and see if there are any weaknesses you can fix. Maybe you can find new suppliers or try different shipping routes.
So just like CMA CGM, but on a smaller scale. Figure out your risks, think about your options, and always be ready to adapt.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to reach out for help. Go to those industry events, talk to other people in your field, find some experts to give you advice. The more you know, the better prepared you'll be.
It sounds like if you plan ahead, stay informed, and find the right people to help you out, you'll be in pretty good shape to deal with anything that comes your way.
Yeah.
It really feels like we're in a time when knowing what's going on and being able to change with things is what will make or break you in the freight world.
You're absolutely right. And I think there's one more thing that we shouldn't forget. Be curious. Don't be scared to ask questions. Think about things in new ways and be open to fresh ideas. This industry is always changing, and the people who are curious and keep learning are the ones who are going to succeed.
It's kind of like having that beginner's mindset, being willing to step outside your comfort zone and be open to all the new possibilities.
Exactly. And that brings us back to everything we've been talking about today. Rising costs, problems with supply chains, how those tariffs could affect things, and all the exciting stuff happening in Dubai. All of these are challenges and opportunities that are all linked together, and they all mean we have to be adaptable, know what's going on, and yeah, be a little bit curious.
We really have covered a lot of ground today, from those big shipping companies like Hapag-Lloyd and CMA CGM to all the growth in air cargo and what's new over in Dubai.
We've seen how things happening on one side of the world can create a ripple effect across the whole industry. And it just shows how important it is to think globally and understand how all these things are connected.
And probably the most important thing we've talked about today is how all of you listening can use what you learned today to help your own businesses.
Whether that's finding new suppliers, trying new ways to ship things, or using technology to make things better, there are things you can do to face these challenges head on and put yourself in a position to succeed.
So before we wrap things up on Freight Insight Weekly today, we want to leave you with one last question to think about.
What can you do this week to make your business more flexible and ready to bounce back from anything in this always changing world of global freight?
Lots of good one to think about. And don't forget to subscribe to the Freight Collab YouTube channel and join the conversation by leaving a comment below. Let us know what you think.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep those freight insights coming.